There are some places that don't just sit quietly on the landscape. They hold weight. Brooksville Cemetery is one of those places. At first glance, it's peaceful. Moss-draped oaks, marble angels softened by time, iron fences holding tight to family plots. More than 5,000 souls rest here across just over 50 acres. But beneath that quiet beauty lies a layered history, one that began long before city records, long before paved roads and manicured sections. Back when this was raw frontier land, shaped by war, hardship, and survival. So what stories are etched into these stones? And what does the cemetery reveal about how Brooksville and Florida itself was built? Let's walk. In April of 1887, the city of Brooksville purchased 5 acres of what was then known as Chocochatty Cemetery. From that original parcel, the grounds expanded over time through additional purchases and donations to just over 50 acres today. But burials here predate that official purchase. The land was already serving as a burial ground by the 1840s, when Florida was still a territory and this region was unsettled, contested, and often dangerous. The cemetery didn't begin as a landscaped memorial park. It began as necessity. And necessity on the frontier was rarely gentle. One of the earliest documented burials associated with this cemetery is Charlotte Wynn Pyles Crum, who died on September 12, 1842. Her death occurred during the volatile final months of the Second Seminole War. Although the war officially ended in 1842, violence and fear did not immediately disappear from the Florida frontier. Charlotte's death reflects the tension that surrounded settlement during this period, especially following the passage of the Armed Occupation Act of 1842, which encouraged settlers to claim and defend land in exchange for ownership. A few years later, in 1845, the oldest marked grave in the cemetery was placed. Jane Hope, who died at just 30 years old. Her family arrived in this region as early as 1832. Jane's simple stone stands as a quiet testament to pioneer life, where disease, childbirth complications, environmental hardship, and limited medical care often shortened lives long before old age could. These early burials tell us something important. Brooksville Cemetery was not founded in comfort. It was forged in survival. Some graves demand you to stop, not because they're grand, but because they feel personal. One of the most striking memorials belongs to William Henry Varn, who died in 1913 at just 9 years old. A sculpted likeness stands over his family plot, one of the most distinctive statues in the cemetery. In 1913, childhood illness often moved swiftly and mercilessly. Before antibiotics and modern surgical care, even common infections could turn fatal. Whatever claimed William's life, the grief was carved into marble so it would never be forgotten. Not far away rests Kirven Lawhon, age 16. In 1918, he was working at the Aetna Chemical Company near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, producing explosives during World War I. On May 18, 1918, a massive explosion tore through the plant, killing and injuring dozens of workers. Local accounts described Kirven attempting to help others during the chaos before being caught in a second explosion. He died the following day from his injuries. He was 16, old enough to work, too young to die in a wartime industrial disaster hundreds of miles from home. His grave reminds us that even small Florida towns were connected to the global machinery of World War I. Brooksville Cemetery contains veterans from nearly every major American conflict. Its Civil War presence is especially layered. You'll find Confederate veterans marked with privately placed stones or later issued government markers. While Confederate soldiers were not initially eligible for federal headstones, legislation passed in 1906 allowed standardized government markers to be issued for Confederate graves in private cemeteries. And here's something often overlooked. Union veterans are also buried here. Among them is Brigadier General William Wallace Wilson, a veteran of the Spanish-American War and World War I, associated with the New York National Guard. After a distinguished military career, he retired to Florida, where he was ultimately laid to rest in Brooksville Cemetery following his death in 1937. Former enemies, different uniforms, resting now under the same southern canopy. Time has a way of leveling battle lines. I've visited this cemetery 3 times now, and every single time I find myself walking the oldest section. The weathered stones, the frontier names, the graves where inscriptions are fading into near invisibility. I don't know if it's the age of the stone or the silence that feels heavier there. But that's the part that keeps drawing me in. As I walk deeper into the cemetery, past the oldest graves and toward General Wilson's large monument, that's usually where my steps stop. Beyond that, I drive through the newer sections, but I don't walk them. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because the oldest stones feel closest to being forgotten. And if there's one thing this channel exists to do, it's to make sure forgotten stories stay told. There's a story sometimes shared during historical tours that graves facing east symbolized resurrection and faith, while west-facing graves signified something less honorable. Historically, east-facing burials were common in Christian tradition, symbolizing the rising sun and resurrection, but orientation was often determined by cemetery layout, terrain, or family plot placement, not moral judgment. Still, folklore lingers, and folklore matters, because cemeteries aren't just archives. They're emotional landscapes. Walk here long enough and you'll notice stones sinking, names fading, dates slowly surrendering to time, marbly roads. Memory can too. Brooksville Cemetery is not just a burial ground. It is a manuscript written in stone. It holds frontier conflict, pioneer hardship, industrial tragedy, Civil War division, World War sacrifice, childhood grief, more than 5,000 lives layered across nearly 2 centuries. And when you stand beneath those oaks, it doesn't feel dark. It feels honest. History isn't always comfortable, but it is human. When you visit a place like this, don't just read the dates. Ask yourself, what did this land witness before it became peaceful? If this episode moved you, subscribe and walk with us again next Friday as we uncover more of the South's sacred and sometimes unsettling past. Because forgotten places aren't empty, they're waiting.